Hello, music friends. I'm Sally Utley from Sally Sea of Songs, and a jazz music lover from way back. When I was new to elementary music, I struggled with how to fit it all in, the music theory, the history, the composers, and listening, and all of that with our active singing and playing instruments. It was a lot. I struggled and kept plugging away at my plans, but I knew that I wanted more. In today's session, I will share some of my successes and my struggles with integrating jazz into my elementary music curriculum. As you know, there's many parts to an elementary music curriculum, and at first, those parts did not seem to connect, especially when we only see our students once or twice a week. Then, we got a new art teacher at my school. Thankfully, she stayed for many years. I was in awe of her nice, neat units. My friend always began with a storybook or a video on the life of a master artist. This was a great hook for student interest. She would also share facts about the historical period. Sometimes that was included in the book. And then she introduced some of the works of this master artist, and they identified the characteristics of the style or genre of the work. Finally, the students would create an artwork using those techniques. I'll just have to show you a few pics. Georgia O'Keeffe flowers, clay tiles with texture inspired by Romar Bearden's textural collages, kindergartners painting in the style of Van Gogh's Starry Night. 4th grade, Where You Come From paintings inspired by William H. Johnson, who was a part of the Harlem Renaissance for a bit. Then, she taught a 1st grade unit on Mondrian. That's when I noticed that her lessons focused on line and primary colors. These were elements of art, similar to our elements of music, that even 1st graders could work with. That was the piece I was missing. I could apply this concept to my music planning. Today, I plan to share how I use jazz music to teach essential elementary skills. We'll discuss how to build a unit that includes an artist, some history, some musical style, and creative music making activities. We'll explore ways to incorporate improvisation, syncopation, scat singing, instrument exploration, and some fun jazz lingo to boost our students' musical skills while keeping lessons fun and on track with our educational goals. By the end of this session, you'll have practical strategies to incorporate jazz without sacrificing your existing scope and sequence. Remember, this approach can be applied to the music of any composer or genre. Let's get ready to jam and swing our way through jazz education. To pattern my unit after my friend's art units, I needed to first choose a musician. Select a notable musician who will captivate your students' interest. Some examples that came to mind immediately were Louis Armstrong, Ella Fitzgerald, Duke Ellington, or Bessie Smith. Then introduce the musician. Find a children's book or a brief biography video to present the musician's life and achievements. As with any resources you bring into your classroom, ensure that the resource is age appropriate and engaging for your students. Next, explore the genre. Investigate the characteristics of the jazz genre that the musician represents. Choose several key features of jazz that would be most appropriate to share with your students. Some examples would be improvisation, syncopation, or swing rhythms. Next, gather historical context. Collect a few historical facts about the time period that may have influenced the development of the genre or the musician. Make connections between historical events and the evolution of jazz. You'll always earn bonus points if you can connect with current topics in your students' social studies classes. Finally, align with existing skills. Consider what musical skills you already teach that align with the jazz genre. Think the big picture skills like rhythm, melody, and improvisation. Plan to integrate these skills into your jazz unit. The plan can be started at either end or even in the middle. For example, start with your existing scope and sequence. What skills will you need to be teaching in the coming weeks? Now, what part of the jazz history timeline might you use some of these skills? Work your way down from there. In the next section, we'll delve into the specific skills to focus on and how to teach them through jazz music. The first skill I would like to talk about today are listening skills, tuning into musical stories. In the world of jazz, listening isn't just hearing. It's like following a musical story. Encourage your young listeners to pick up on the different instruments that are playing in harmony. It's a bit like solving a musical mystery. Can they identify the saxophone's smooth whispers? Can they hear the lively conversation between the call and response between the drums and the piano? Can they identify the parts of the song that seem to be composed versus the parts of the song that include improvisation? As their listening skills grow, so does their ability to appreciate the rich tales woven by jazz musicians. Syncopation. Add a dash of surprise. This is a rhythmic concept that is often introduced in upper elementary. A simple definition of syncopation is a rhythm in which stress is placed on a normally unstressed beat. Contrast the steady beat with the syncopated rhythm by using movement or body percussion. Once your students demonstrate an understanding of the difference, then bring in an active listening exercise by using ragtime or Harlem stride style piano music. Both of these styles feature a steady beat, umpa pattern in the left hand and a syncopated melody in the right hand. Challenge your students to listen for both. One difference between those two styles is ragtime tends to be a composed style of music, whereas Harlem stride style tends to have improvised melodies in the right hand. Improvisation. Let the creativity flow. I gotta tell you, this one tripped me up for a long time. As I listened to those musicians improvise those solos, I was amazed and intimidated. If I couldn't do that, how could I even begin to teach my students to improvise? Through my MLT training, I learned a very simple definition. Improvisation is being different from the model. So we started with improvising rhythms, as that seemed less threatening to me. Here are 2 ways that worked well for me and my students. First, call and response rhythm chants. I use simple 4-beat rhythm pattern echoes on a neutral syllable. And by echo, I mean exact copy. I would say a pattern like this. Ba, 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 and my students would copy it. I would go on for several patterns, allowing them to copy each time. ba 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 ba. Ba 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 ba. Ba 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 ba. This gets those patterns fresh in their minds for use in a minute. The next step is a puppet demonstration of being different. I would have a puppet and I would call out, be the caller, and have one rhythm pattern, and my puppet would answer with a different pattern. After a short demonstration of me and my puppet being different, I can ask 2 or 3 volunteers if they would like to try to take the puppet's place. At this stage, I definitely keep my patterns simple and consistent. But I might even do the same pattern every time, like this. Ba 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 ba. And then let the students echo with whatever pattern that comes. And even if all they can manage to get out is a ba ba ba, well, that's different, and they were successful. After 2 or 3 students, I repeat those class echo patterns and then take a few more volunteers. Another way for my students to practice is to ask the students to use both of their hands as puppets and have a rhythm conversation with their hands. This sequence is a part of my regular music classes from the 2nd semester of kindergarten on and is usually unaccompanied. However, once students know and understand how it works, it's great fun to add a jazzy instrumental backing track to our rhythm conversations. Once we're comfortable with the rhythm conversations, the next step is, for me, is to improvise new rhythms for familiar melodies. Choose a short song that your students know well. For example, Hot Cross Buns was a great song for my 4th graders to begin with. First, we sing the song on a neutral syllable. Bum, 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 bum. Next, we improvise different rhythms for those pitches. Bum, ba-dum, ba-dum, bum, 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 bum. Bum, ba-dum, bum, 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 bum. Of course, with those 4th graders, we transfer all of this over to our recorders. For an extra layer of interest, I used an app, the app's name is iReal Pro, to create a backing track that would play on a loop. We practiced as a group, and that does sound a little messy, but it's very non-threatening to students. And then go around the room, taking volunteers for solos. The app has a great jazzy swing combo. But I also created some different styles, such as march, waltz, and ballad. We got lots of practice and improvisation out of one simple song. As an aside, that recorder activity was not a part of my jazz units. This was a way for me to sprinkle some jazz into another unit, that recorder unit. Adding jazz or pop or other musical styles into our curriculum doesn't have to be a complete unit unto itself, as long as the goals and objectives of the unit are being addressed. Adding these musical styles is a great way to stay relevant and engage student interest. That recorder example of improvising rhythms to a familiar melody leads us perfectly into scat singing, vocal jazz magic. Invite your students to discover the joy of scat singing, where the words take a back seat and voices become instruments. It's like a musical conversation where they get to express themselves freely. We begin our journey into scat singing by listening to examples of Louis Armstrong or Ella Fitzgerald. As with improvisation, it seemed much easier and less threatening to begin with rhythmic scatting, which my students liken to rapping, before moving on to scatting over familiar melodies. So here's my tip from the trenches. I found that just telling my students to say any nonsense syllables really made them freeze up. After listening to an example of scat singing, we made a list on the board of some of the syllables we heard. Then, we chose just a few of those syllables to use in our first attempts. Jazz vocalist Ella Fitzgerald would have been proud. Grooving into musical mastery. Let's jam! Transform your classroom into a mini jazz club by introducing the concepts of a jam session and collective improvisation. Let the kids get hands-on with simple percussion instruments, or even makeshift ones. This hands-on exploration not only sharpens their listening skills, but also deepens their appreciation for the diverse sounds of jazz. One of my favorite lessons in 4th and 5th grades used found sounds like cardboard boxes and shakers made from soda cans or plastic water bottles. Following some listening examples and some discussion on complementary rhythms and leaving space for others to play, we jammed. We created a groove. Of course, our early efforts fell apart quickly. After a short discussion about what sounded good and what went wrong, we tried again, and each attempt at creating a groove was a little better. This very short video clip is not exactly a jazzy example, but perhaps it will give you some inspiration to try collective improvisation. These 3rd graders had been working collaboratively on complementary rhythms. You can see that we were using found sounds. That included a few large boxes in the back, a small oatmeal box drum in the front, along with some water bottle shakers and one go-go bell. Again, I did not assign any parts. The students were improvising on their own, making corrections as a group. Some of the corrections involved deciding which parts should play on which part of the measure, so there was actually space to hear the softer instruments. To see them make conscious musical decisions was awesome. Let's take a listen. Well, that was a fun week of lessons for me. I hope you will try this with your students. Now, adding some swing into the vocabulary. Infuse your music lessons with a touch of jazz slang just for fun. Jazzers are cool cats and have a language all their own. Introduce terms like axe for instruments, chops for musical skills, and gig for a performance opportunity. It's a playful way to teach music while also immersing your students in the vibrant culture of jazz. Imagine their smiles as they confidently say, "Let's jam, teach." With these added words, your classroom becomes a linguistic jazz haven, making every lesson a delightful blend of education and entertainment. Now, for a quick review, we spent a lot of time looking at skills that I might already be in your scope and sequence. I sprinkled in some suggestions on jazz musicians who use those skills in their music. Let me give you a little help on gathering historical context and exploring the different jazz genres. To support you in bringing jazz into your classroom, I'm excited to introduce a new free Wakelet collection. This resource includes a jazz styles timeline, brief facts about each style, and key musician videos that you can use to build your own units. You can find the link to the Wakelet collection in your session handout. Additionally, I have prepared 5 done-for-you lessons on early jazz and blues that will keep your students engaged about learning. You can find a link to these lessons in your session handout and also by visiting the conference exhibit hall and clicking on the Listening and History tab. Of my TPT shop, which is on sale for the duration of the conference. Those Scat Words cards and Jazz Lingo cards are there, as well as jazz musicians' response journal and coloring pages. This resource includes kid-friendly research links and response journal pages and may be the most valuable and helpful as you build your own jazz units. With these resources at your fingertips, you'll be able to dive right into the world of jazz with your students and create a vibrant educational experience. I want to encourage you to visit the virtual exhibit hall. I always love visiting the exhibits when I go to a conference, and this virtual conference is no exception. You'll find lots of resources curated just for you on any topic you just might need. It's in the exhibit hall that you can find the link to the PD certificate by clicking on the training certificate button at the top right. Thanks for jamming with me. Be sure to come back tomorrow. We begin with our welcome at 11, followed by Making Open House Easy with Jennifer Hibbard at 11:30. Finally, don't forget to download the session handout where I've shared links to the free resources mentioned today, along with some notes from the session. Keep swinging and happy teaching.